Good morning. Today I'm going to begin reading Alchemy by Louise von Franz. I'm going to share the cover with you now. It's published by Inner City Books. And before his death, Daryl Sharp gave me permission to read any of the books that are in his collected library. And so this book seems to be quite important to me. And today we are also going to begin a discussion of this series, both the Alchemy by Marie-Louise von Franz and Psychology in Alchemy by Dr. Carl Jung. And so I'm going to just give you a couple of the figures here and then begin the reading. So this is the book that I'm sharing with you now on the screen. And then I'm going to share with you a couple of other things. One is the acknowledgements. And so that comes here. Acknowledgements. This book is based on the transcription by Miss Una Thomas of the lecture series presented by Dr. von Franz at the C.G. Jung Institute, Zurich in 1959. The author and publisher are grateful to Miss Thomas for her faithful preparation of the original version. The text in its present form was edited for publication by Daryl Sharp and Marianne Woodman. Daryl Sharp selected the illustrations, wrote the captions, and compiled the index. The illustration is the philosophical egg is both birthplace of and container for the new attitudes symbolized by the alchemical goal of the conjunctio, the union of opposites, male and female, consciousness and the unconscious, etc. Here, that goal is pictured as hermaphrodite in triumph over the dragon and the winged globe of chaos, threatening faces of the unconscious. The 7 planets represent different aspects of the personality and the 7 stages of transformation, according to Jamsthaler, Viatorium Spagiricum, 1625. Okay, so that's that. And then this is figure 1. The mountain of the Adepts. The process of psychological development is analogous to the stages of the alchemical transformation of base matter into gold. The philosopher's stone, here represented as a temple of the wise buried in the earth. The phoenix, symbol of the renewed personality, straddles the sun and moon. The opposites are masculine and feminine. The zodiac in the background symbolizes the duration of the process. The 4 elements indicate wholeness. The blindfolded man represents the stumbling search for truth. The right way is shown by the investigator prepared to follow his natural instincts. Let's see, I guess I didn't share that with you, so I better do that now. So this is a share of what I just read. And you can read it for yourself. I just read it. And now moving along. So this is a lecture series that Dr. von Franz did in Zurich in 1959. And what I'm doing is I'm going to today read the first part of the lecture without the Q&A. And then in future readings, I'll read the Q&As as the book goes along. It's about, let's see, it's several hundred pages long. It's nearly 270 pages long. So it's going to take a while to read, and I'm going to read it in short pieces of 30 to 45 minutes. Introduction. This is Marie-Louise Lanfrance giving her lecture. I've given much thought as to how I should give this course, introducing you to the symbolism of alchemy, and have decided on a short interpretation of a good many texts instead of one text as at other times. As we have 9 lectures, I thought I would give 3 lectures on Old Greek, 3 on Arabic, and 3 on later European alchemy, so that you may obtain at least a glimpse of every phase of the development of this science. As you know, Dr. Jung has devoted many years of study to this subject, which he practically dug up from the dunghill of the past, for it was a forgotten and despised field of investigation, which has suddenly revived. The fact that now the smallest pamphlet sells for about 100 Swiss francs, while about 10 years ago an excellent book on alchemy could be bought for 2 or 3 francs, is actually due to Dr. Jung, because except for the interest displayed by some Freemason circles and later developments by Rosicrucians, nobody really knew anything about the subject when he began his work on it. As soon as we get into the text, you will understand to some extent how alchemy can be forgotten and why still, even in Jungian circles, many people say that they can go along with Dr. Jung as far as the myth interpretations is concerned and with all else he has written, but that when it comes to alchemy, they give up and either do not read or grumble while reading his books on the subject. This is because alchemy in itself is tremendously dark and complex. And the texts are difficult to read, so that an enormous kind of technical background of knowledge is needed if you wish to penetrate into this field. I am giving this introductory course to students in the hope that it may enable them to get into the material better, so that when they read Dr. Jung's books, they will have a background of knowledge and be able to understand them. In Psychology and Alchemy, that's volume 12 of the collected works of C.G. Jung, Dr. Jung has, as it were, introduced alchemy into psychology, first by publishing a series of the dreams of a natural scientist, which contain a great amount of alchemical symbolism. These are the developmental dreams of Wolfgang Pauli, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics. And then by quoting from old texts, whereby he hoped to show how important and modern his material is and how much it has to say of modern man. He himself discovered alchemy absolutely empirically. He once told me that he frequently came across certain motifs in his patients' dreams, which he could not understand. And then one day, he started to look at old books on alchemy and noticed a connection. For example, a woman patient dreamt that an eagle was at first flying up to the sky and then suddenly turned round its head, began to eat its own wings and drop back onto the earth. Dr. Jung was naturally able to understand this symbolism without historical parallels. The high soaring spirit, or thought bird, so to speak. The dream indicates a sort of enantiodromia, the reversal of a psychic situation. All the same, he was very much struck by the motif, which one at once recognizes as archetypal and which one feels convinced must have parallels. It strikes one as a general motif, yet it was nowhere to be found. Then one day he discovered the Ripley scroff, which gives a series of pictures of the alchemical process, partly published in Psychology and Alchemy, where there is an eagle with a king's head, which turns back and eats its own wings. The coincidence struck him very forcibly, and for years he kept it in mind and felt that there must be more to alchemy and that he should go into the subject. But he hesitated to attack this most complex field, realizing how much work it would involve and that it would mean rubbing up on his Greek and Latin and reading so much. Finally, however, he came to the conclusion that it had to be done, that there was too much buried in the subject which was important to us for a better understanding of the dream material of modern people. For Dr. Jung, it was not a theoretical problem, but a striking parallel to the material with which he was dealing. But now we might also ask ourselves why alchemical symbolism should be chosen or should be closer to the unconscious product of many modern people than any other material. Why would it not suffice to study comparative mythology, fairy tales, and the history of religions? Why has it to be particularly alchemy? There are various reasons for this. If we study symbolism in the comparative history of religion or in Christianity, all the allegories of the Virgin Mary, for instance, or the tree of life, or the cross, or the symbolism of the dragon in Christian medieval material, and so on. Or if we study mythology as we know it, for instance, from the North American Indians, the beliefs of the Hopis, the song of the Navajo, we are in each case dealing with material formed in collectivity and handed on by more or less organized tradition. Among the North American Indians, there are traditions of medicine men who handed on the songs and rituals to their peoples, while certain things were known by the whole tribe which participated in the rituals. The same holds good for Christian symbolism, for that is handed on in the traditions of the church, and the whole symbolism of the liturgy and of the Mass, with all its meaning, is transmitted by doctrine, tradition, and human organizations. There are also the different Eastern forms of yoga and other forms of meditation. Such formed symbols certainly originated in the unconscious, but they have since been worked upon through and by tradition. One repeatedly sees how anyone who has had original and immediate experience of unconscious symbols begins afterward to work upon them. And I'll give you another symbol right now. This is figure 2. Here's figure 2. And it says, the eagle as a symbol of the spirit, by which, according to Jung, the alchemist meant all the higher mental faculties, such as reason, insight, and moral discrimination. Okay, so that's figure 2. I'll expect, if you are watching this afterward, that you'll be able to go back and read this slowly. I'm not going to leave it on the screen for very long. Okay, going on. Let us take as an example St. Nicholas van der Flue, the Swiss saint, who had a vision of a wanderer and divine figure which came toward him wearing a shining bearskin and singing a song of 3 words. From the original report, it is obvious that the saint was convinced that either God or Christ was appearing to him. But the original report got lost, and until about 80 years ago, there was only a report made by one of his earliest biographers, who told the story more or less correctly, but omitted the bearskin. The 3 words of the song refer to the Trinity. The divine wanderer would be Christ visiting the saint, and so on. All that the biographer mentioned, but with the bearskin, but with the bearskin, he could do nothing, for why should Christ wear a bearskin? So that item was dropped, and it was only by the chance rediscovery of the original report of the vision that it was afterwards included. This is what happens to original experiences, which are handed on, for a selection is made, and what fits or coincides with what is already known is handed on, while other details tend to get dropped because they seem strange and one does not know how to deal with them. It seems, therefore, that symbolism handed on by tradition is to a certain extent rationalized and purged of the scurrilities of the unconscious, the funny little details which the unconscious tags on, sometimes contradictions and dirt. That, on a small scale, happens even within ourselves. A young doctor suddenly became very skeptical over the way we write down our dreams, believing that a lot was falsified when one wrote down one's dreams in the morning. So he put a wire recorder by his bedside, and when he woke in the night, even in a half sleepy state, he recorded his dream, and in the morning wrote down the dream as he remembered it and compared the two. He then discovered that his skepticism was exaggerated. The reports we make of dreams the next morning are almost correct, but involuntarily we introduce order into them. For instance, he dreamt that something happened in a house and that then afterwards he went into the house. In retelling the dream in the morning, he corrected the time sequence and wrote down that he went into the house and then experienced this and that. Actually, the dreams recorded at once are more confused as to time, but otherwise they are pretty correct. Therefore, even when a dream crosses the threshold of consciousness, consciousness is reporting it. In reporting it, does something to it, amends it, and makes it a little more understandable. Cum grano saltus. With a grain of salt, you could compare the above to the way in which religious experiences are handed on in a living religious system, namely that the personal immediate experience is usually purified, clarified, and revised. For example, in the histories of personal inner life of Catholic saints, most of the saints had immediate experiences of the Godhead. That belongs in the definition of a saint, or visions of the Virgin Mary or Christ, and so on. But the church has rarely published anything without first expurgating what was considered to be personal material. Only what fitted in with tradition was chosen. The same thing happens in free primitive communities. Even the North American Indians omit certain details, considering them not interesting to collective conscious ideas. Australian Aborigines celebrate a festival called Kuna Pipi, which goes on for 30 years. For 30 years, certain rituals are performed at specified times. It is a big rebirth ritual, which lasts for a whole generation. Then the 30 years are up. It starts over again. The ethnologist who first described it took the trouble to collect the dreams in the tribes, which referred to the festival. He discovered that members of the tribe often dreamt about it, and that in those dreams, as one would expect, and as would happen to us, there were variations in little details which did not fit with what actually took place. Australian Aborigines say that if a dream contained a good idea, it was told to the tribe and adopted as a part of the festival, which in that way varied a little sometimes, though in the main they kept to the tradition which had been handed on. Here. Okay. Anyway, whatever. I'm not seeing the chat at the moment on the YouTube. Okay, reading on. When analyzing Catholics, I have often seen the same phenomenon, namely that they dream of the Mass, but sometimes something special happens. For instance, the priest distributes hot soap instead of the host, or something like that. It is all quite correct, except for the one detail. I remember a nun's dream in which the middle of the Sanctus, that is, at the holiest moment, just when the transformation should take place, the old bishop who was reading the Mass suddenly stopped and said, "Now something more important is first necessary," and then gave a sermon on the Incarnation. Then he stopped again and said that now they would go on with the old traditional Mass and hand it over to two young priests to finish it. Apparently, this nun, as is the case with many other people, had not enough real understanding of the mystery of the Mass. It was to her just a mechanical repetition of the mystery, and therefore, before the transformation took place, the dream showed that one should really explain to people what was happening, because if they did not participate with their minds, it was of no help to them. They were just believing without comprehension. So in her dream, the bishop gave a long explanation, after which the classical Mass continued with younger priests, showing that it was a renewal. Renewal takes place according to the way in which the Mass is understood. And here the old man handed over to the two young men. This illustrates how individual experience of religious symbols always varies a little from the official formula, which is only an average pattern. There is very little immediate manifestation of the unconscious, either in history or elsewhere. There's very little immediate manifestation of the unconscious, either in history or elsewhere. By observing dreams, visions, and hallucinations, etc., modern man can now, for the first time, look in an unprejudiced way at the phenomenon of the unconscious. What comes from the unconscious can be observed through individuals. The past has handed on some rare reports of individual experiences, but on the whole, symbols of the unconscious reach us in the more traditional way, due to the fact that normally mankind has not approached the unconscious individually, but with few exceptions, has related to it indirectly through religious systems. This obtains generally, as far as I can see, except in the oldest and most primitive societies, and in certain other, but also already codified forms of approach to the unconscious. In a number of Eskimo tribes, there are practically no contents of collective consciousness. There are some few teachings about certain ghosts and spirits and gods, Scylla, the god of the air, Sedna, the goddess of the sea, and so on, which are handed on orally by certain people, but only personal experiences that are handed on by the shaman or medicine man, who are the religious personalities of such communities. In the Eskimos lead such a hard life and have such difficulty in surviving, owing to the terrific conditions under which they live, that normally everybody concentrates only on survival, with the exception of a few chosen individuals who have some commerce with ghosts and have inner experiences and dreams. So the people simply relate to those dreams and have their own thoughts about them, rather than a modern person in analysis who the only guidance they receive is in meeting other shamans and exchanging experiences, so that they may not be quite alone with their inner experiences. Generally, the younger ones look for older shamans, but afraid that otherwise they might go mad, just as we would. In that case, there is a minimum of collective consciousness tradition. and a maximum of the immediate personal experience of a few individuals. I think it probable that this represents the remnants of an original condition, because according to anthropological reflections, one can assume that mankind lived originally in little tribal groups of about 20 or 30 people, among whom there were usually 2 or 3 gifted introverts who had personal inner experiences and were the spiritual guides, while the strong hunters or fighters were the earthly guides. In such a case, there is material about immediate inner experiences and very little tradition. Then there are still phenomena of individuals meeting the unconscious immediately in the organized initiation experiences of certain people. For example, in many of the North American Indian tribes, part of the initiation of a young medicine man consists of going to a mountain peak or into the desert after fasting, and sometimes also after taking drugs, and there seeking a vision or hallucination or experience, which he then reports to his master, his initiator. If, for example, he says that he has seen a lizard, then he is told that he belongs to the Thunderbird clan and will have to become such and such a medicine man. But there, the interpretations of the individual experience is connected with collective conscious tradition, and anything which is completely individual, anything strange, a medicine man would simply just omit. Paul Radin has published Dreams of Indians, showing how they interpret them. And you see that they just skip what they don't understand. They pick out of the dream what connects with collective consciousness, ideas, and skip the funny details, just as beginners in Jungian analysis do when they begin to interpret their own dreams. If you suggest that they try their hand at that, they usually pick out one motif that seems to connect with something they understand and say they know that what that means, that it refers to such and such. And then I say, but what about this detail, this other, which they tend to omit? Immediate experiences of the unconscious by certain individuals may also later be codified or interpreted or built into a religious system. Naturally, in all religious systems, there are sects which tend to revivify immediate experiences. Whenever a religion seems to be too codified, a compensatory sect is usually formed to revivify individual experiences, and this accounts for the many splits. For instance, there are the Sunnis and the Shiites in Islam, and so on, or the Talmudic school and the Kabbalah in the Jewish Middle Ages, where the codified religious symbols are handed on. The latter group tends to give more value to individual experiences, the one claiming to be orthodox and the other claiming to have the living spirit, which would also be the contrast between extrovert and introvert types. But even in the tradition of the introvert who claims to have a living spirit, there is very little real personal experience of the unconscious. There are always only a few individuals who have such experiences, probably because they are so dangerous and frightening that only rare and unusually courageous people go this way. Or only, let's see. Only rare and unusually courageous people go this way, or fools who do not know how dangerous the thing is and who therefore are driven mad by it. In some of his early lectures at ETH, the Technical College in Zurich, Dr. Jung, in order to exemplify the symbolism of the express process of individuation, and what he meant by it, discussed a series of images in an Eastern meditation text, and the famous spiritual exercises of Exercitia Spiritualia, or St. Ignatius of Loyola, as well as Hugh de Saint Victor, Benjamin Minor. He showed that all these forms of codified meditation contain the essential theories or symbols which normally appear in the process of individuation in individuals, but also these approaches to the unconscious and most forms of Eastern meditation, as well as medieval Christian forms, contain a program. For instance, a man who goes through the Exercitia of St. Ignatius has in the first week to concentrate on the sentence, Homo creatus est, the next week on the suffering of Christ, and so on. If in the middle of his contemplation, he thinks that he would like some coffee, that would be a worldly disturbance by the devil, which he has to restrain. But there might also be holy disturbances. He might, when meditating on the cross, suddenly see a blue light or a crown of roses around the cross. But as that does not fit in, that thought also has to be banished. That would be the devil falsifying the process, for he should see the cross, not a bunch of roses or something of that sort. He is therefore taught to reject those spontaneous eruptions of the unconscious and adhere fanatically to the program. Naturally, I better stop here and show you image number 3. Okay. Naturally is still concentrated on symbols of the unconscious, for the cross is a symbol of the unconscious, but his mind is directed into a definite channel given through collective tradition. If he tells his director de conscience he has seen a bathtub instead of the cross, he will be told that he has not concentrated properly. He has deviated. The same thing applies to a certain Eastern meditation form. If beautiful divas and goddesses appear and try to divert the yogin from his goal, he must chase such thoughts away as disturbing factors. Thus, in these forms of approach to the unconscious, conscious direction in a prescribed way or path must be conformed to, and certain thoughts which come up ignored. For this reason, the symbolism which appears in such forms is not quite the same kind as that in dreams and active imagination, for we tell people simply to observe what comes up, which naturally produces slightly different material, so that we can only compare the two products relatively. The alchemists were in a completely different situation. They believed that they were studying the unknown phenomenon of matter, and details I will give later on, and they just observed what came up and interpreted that somehow, but without any specific plan. There would be a lump of some strange matter, but as they did not know what it was, then they conjectured something or other, which of course would be unconscious projection, but there was no definite intention or tradition. Therefore, one could say that in alchemy, projections were made most naively and unprogrammatically and completely uncorrected. Imagine an old alchemist situation. A man in a certain village would build an isolated hut and cook things which caused explosions. Quite naturally, everyone calls him a witch doctor. One day, someone comes and says he has found a queer piece of metal, and would the alchemist be interested in buying it? The alchemist does not know the value of the metal, but gives the man some money at a guess. He then puts what he has been brought in his stove and mixes it with sulfur or something similar to see what happens. And if the metal was lead, he would be badly poisoned by the vapors. He concludes, therefore, that this particular matter makes one feel sick if approached and nearly kills you. And therefore, he says that there is a demon in lead. Afterward, when he writes his recipes, he adds a footnote saying, "Beware of lead, for in it is a demon which will kill people and make them mad," which would be quite an obvious and reasonable explanation of for someone at that time and level. Therefore, lead was a wonderful subject for the projection of destructive factors, since in certain connections, its effects are poisonous. Acid substances were also dangerous, but on the other hand, they're corrosive. On the other hand, being corrosive and a means of dissolving things were highly important for chemical operations. Thus, if you wish to melt something or have it in liquid form, it could be melted or dissolved in acid solutions. And for this reason, the projection was that acid was a dangerous substance which dissolves, but which also makes it possible to handle certain substances, or else it is a medium for transformation. You open up, so to speak, a metal with which you can do nothing and make it accessible or transformation by the use of certain liquids. The alchemist, therefore, wrote about it in the naive form, which I am now describing, and did not notice that was not natural science, but contained a lot of projection, if looked at from a modern chemical standpoint. Thus, there exists in alchemy an astonishing amount of material from the unconscious produced in a situation where the conscious mind did not follow the definite program, but only searched. Dr. Jung himself approached the unconscious in a similar manner, and in analysis, we too try to get people to adopt an attitude where they do not approach the unconscious according to a program. We simply say, for instance, that the situation looks bad, that the subject is in an unsatisfactory condition, and that we should look at that and at the life phenomena, which we call the unconscious, and consider together what that might represent or could be driving at. Such a conscious point de depart, which contains a minimum of programming, corresponds to the conscious point de depart of the alchemist, so that the unconscious corresponds in like manner. And that is why alchemical writings are especially helpful for the understanding of modern material. Okay, so now I've gotten up to the Q&A for this particular lecture. And so what I'm going to do is conclude at this time, because today and every day, every Wednesday for probably the coming year, we are going to be talking about alchemy in our advanced reading group. We meet every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And so this has been the first reading for that group. And if you wish to join us, you can join us by joining the MailChimp. Let me get that for you. what you do is you join the MailChimp advice, and by putting your email address in, then you will receive the notifications of all of our sessions as you wish. And so here is the MailChimp mailing list.